Good afternoon, everyone. Until a few seconds ago, this was showing the footy, actually. If it's not going well, we'll revert to that. Thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to frame what will be a series of kind of more outward-looking presentations, looking at examples from elsewhere, some other things that London might learn from. It may appear strange to ask how London can retain its position as a world centre for creative industries, because, of course, many of the world's leading brands in media, design, fashion, retail, IT are here already. It's big, it's growing strongly, and it's forecast to grow even more strongly still. And, of course, it's concentrated particularly in London. It generates a great deal of wealth. And if you look here, you can see a measure of growth in gross value added over the later stages of the last economic cycle, up to 2008, for each of the sectors within creative industries. And, of course, it's driven by creative, talented individuals, which in turn attracts to London more creative, talented individuals. And complex social networks, in my view, are absolutely at the heart of creative industries by definition. So that in turn means that London has got a tremendous reputation for innovation in music, design, fashion, technology, the iconic piece of technology of the age. The iPod was designed here in London. So why ask the question? Well, first of all, it's absolutely critical for London. The last economic cycle in London was driven principally by financial and business services. Question, can creative industries replace financial services as the engine of London's growth? Second, all industries consolidate. I'll come on to this and show you how I think that happens and why it happens. So all industries consolidate, increasingly in fewer and fewer world-leading centres. And cities are setting out their stall and competing like mad for economic activity in creative industries. So let me start off with a quick look at London's growth, because London's growth, as I say, in the last cycle was principally about financial and business services. By the end of the last cycle, London was the world's dominant city alongside New York in that sector. And in some ways, that was a little bit of a surprise, because many of you will remember these sorts of headings in the late 80s and early 90s. And the point was technology was going to allow financial services activity to be ubiquitous, to be undertaken from any city, anywhere. And at that time, a lot of the major financial services businesses, a lot of the investment banks, had operations in 10 or a dozen cities across the European region, for example. And many foresaw the rise of Frankfurt, say, along with Brussels and Hamburg and a number of other cities as major financial services centres. But, of course, what happened was that technology allowed us to match the underlying margin of an activity with the natural cost base that allowed it to be profitable, hence the whole drive to offshoring. And I would argue that the same thing is going on now. So the result of that process was we saw over the last 20 years or so ever more advanced skills concentration in a few key cities. And so at the peak of the cycle we ended up, I would argue, with London and New York as dominant centres. But it also happened because London was able to deliver the type of working environment, the type of buildings that financial and business services firms need. And again, I would argue the ability to respond in a master-planned, real estate-driven way was critical to London actually establishing a competitive advantage there. And that will be something, no doubt, we'll need to debate. And it follows on very neatly from Philip's contention earlier that the way work is going, you should not actually need to focus on the real estate. I would argue that you do. So, consolidation in creative industries. Of course, it will not be the same. It will follow a very different pattern, reflecting skills, technology, and history. They're all very, very different. And of course, there are well-established, world-class cities in creative industries. Many of them, if you trace it back, creative centres because of accidents of history. You know, whether it's the early days of the film industry, whether it's Silicon Valley and Shockley, whether it's Route 128, whether it's Cambridge Science Park focused on universities and research institutions, whether it's the presence of, you know, specific facilities. I mean, Sterling Sound and Metropolis Studio in London, between them do over half the digital mastering of all digital music output in the world. So accidents of history can have a huge impact. And of course, London is a centre of media and broadcast. So there are established centres already. Now, I would argue that it's going to be very different in creative industries to financial services because the bandwidth of activity, the breadth of activity is completely different. So it goes from, on the one end, or the one edge of that bandwidth, highly edgy, creative, talented individuals. And talent and innovation is at the heart of it. And many cities are focusing on that, whether it's the Canal District in Manchester, whether it's Hoxton, but focusing on nurturing that, you know, really creative, edgy community. Many cities, of course, have also realised that iconic attractions can give the city a step up. You know, whether it's the Lowry in Manchester or the Guggenheim in Bilbao, you know, very well documented case studies that have had a huge impact on the economic performance of those cities. And more recently, I'd argue the role of education and research institutions. And of course, we'll be hearing from Imperial today about what they're doing just over the road here. But it's interesting, isn't it, that three of the largest regeneration schemes in London, this is King's Cross with the University of the Arts, here is Ravensbourne College, who we've got to come into Greenwich, and here's a rendering of the Imperial campus over the way, which will be a new research, education, business campus, are actually underpinning really important regeneration proposals. And how do you achieve a blend between all of that, which seems to me to create a destination that really does create a place? It creates those social networks which are the foundation for creative clusters. But alongside that, how do you layer in the commercial and mixed-use infrastructure, and how do you attract in the world brands? Because, again, another contention for debate, and this is Chiswick Park, world brands. Here we have a whole series of international media and publishing companies. And I would argue that destination creation is what you get out of edgy, talented people, out of education and research institutions, but they themselves don't necessarily create the value, which means that you've got an economic delivery model, but in fact you need the commercial and mixed-use infrastructure and the world brands around it to actually create the value. That seems to me to be the challenge. It's a very difficult thing to achieve, just getting that blend. You can't do it in too forceful a way. You can't have signs everywhere saying, keep off the grass. It's got to be something that is organic and can grow. And that's a heck of a challenge for any master planner. So, competing cities. The competition for this is absolutely fierce, and it's getting hotter, in my view.